worth starting where we did last time. That we presented this all as a very fun, like let's debate what's better, team or individual. But the truth is we sort of tricked everybody because we came on here and we were like, well, it kind of depends, right? It depends on you and it depends on what you're willing to commit to. Because there's always the three options in real estate, right? The way I always explain this to people is how do you want to pay for your growth, right? Do you want to do it? You want to pay somebody else to do it, or you want to stay where you are? Those are always your three options. And in our world, that often looks like, do I build or start a team and then run it and work through everything they're in? Should I join a team and help build somebody else's business, or should I be a solo agent and take on the responsibility myself? And this is where we started last time. And Brian, I always feel like you do such a good job of articulating this, because I think we've both learned as leaders that it's easy to aspire for people without their permission. In other words, it's easy to tell people you should do it this way. And we're always talking from our own perspective, right? Like if I'm saying you should do it this way, I'm saying I believe this is the best way. And we're always going to believe our own truth the most, because otherwise we would be the fools to be doing it any differently. But the truth is, you've got to answer these questions before you can make any decision about what you're going to do after that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are really good questions to look in the mirror and reflect on, right? To ask yourself. The reality is there are lots of ways to have massive success in our industry. And it's heavily dependent on what you really want. What are your strengths? What are you not great at? What are you willing to learn? What are you unwilling to learn? Like, what do you really want in terms of your life and your business? I think that one big question, I was actually just having a conversation with somebody yesterday. What kind of impact do you want to make? And how do you think you go about doing that? Right? Like, I think we're in this industry, Nikki, where because of some training and education and books and kind of our upbringing, there's almost like this preconceived path to success. And I think you and I call BS on that.
Yep.
Like, you don't have to go build some massive real estate team to live the life of your dreams. And you and I have both been in this industry for a while, and we play different roles. And I think it's worked out okay thus far. And so I can't wait to dig in further. Last time we talked a little bit about pros and cons of these different roles. And today we get to have a little bit more fun and talk about maybe worst practices as well as best practices in these respective lanes.
For sure. And I think, Brian, what's so important about what you just said is that you alluded to, we have to make a decision about what we're willing to do and also what we are unwilling to do or unwilling to unlearn. And so that to me really comes from that there's no path in real estate that's easy. I can't point anyone in a direction wherein I say, listen, this is going to be smooth sailing the whole way. It's not. Any of these options will have the respective challenges that come along with it. And the good news is you get to decide which of those challenges you want to face. And the bad news is that you have to decide which of those challenges you want to face. But any one of those is going to have some rocky terrain at some point. So I think one of the big mistakes that happens too, Brian, is that people look up and like their business isn't perfect and it's not going how they thought it would, or it's hard. And they're like, oh, something's wrong with the path that I chose. I'm like, no, it's supposed to be hard. That's what you signed up for. Welcome to being an entrepreneur. You get all the worst jobs.
As you're saying that, I'll tell you what's going through my head, and I'm laughing because I have yet to meet a solo agent that was producing at a high level that didn't say to themselves, gosh, should I go build a team? And I haven't met a team owner who at some point hasn't said to themselves, damn, should I blow this whole thing down? Should I blow this whole thing up and just go back to me? Like, it is funny. So when you talk about rockiness, like, yes, no matter your path, it's going to exist and it's going to be hard being an entrepreneur and building a business, no matter its size in terms of quantity of people or units or is hard, period.
Yep. And so what we want to walk through today, last time we really walked through, okay, let's have a reality check first, and then let's talk about the pros and cons. Like what's in it for me? What's great about being a solo agent? What's great about building a team? And we talked about all of that. You missed it, go back to the recording. But now we're going to talk about some of the worst and best practices. And we actually got to have a great conversation here, Brian, because we talked about it first when we started building this out. We said, well, aren't the best practices just the opposite of worst practices? Like, is this bad content because we're literally just going to tell someone the opposite? And here's my perspective on this, and let me know if you see it differently. When I think about best and worst, I'm thinking about here's the path to ultimate success. And worst to me isn't just the opposite of that, because the path to ultimate success and the opposite of that might just be like, I could be fairly successful. The worst practices are the things I can tell all of you. If you do this, you will fail. It's not if, it's when. And so I came to it from that standpoint. These are the worst things you could do. And potentially in all of these, you'll see themes of like, we can lie to ourselves and think that we're doing something productive, but we're not. And these are the ways that I consistently see people fail at being an individual agent. So I'm not even talking about worst practices. I'm talking about failure practices is really what I should have called them. These are all the ways that you could surefire run your business into the ground as an individual agent.
I think that's exactly how we approach this subject. And I think it's the way you and I approach a lot of subjects that we've had the opportunity to discuss. And as much as I'd love to say that we came up with this concept, it's very much one that someone like Charlie Munger, Warren's former partner, talks about as a mental model. I think we even talked about it last time we all met, which is this mental model known as inversion. Instead of asking, what do I have to do to have massive success? Charlie would challenge you to ask yourself, if I were to guarantee my failure, what would I have to do? And so when we talked about worst practices, you're right. It might not be the term worst practices may not be right. It may be guaranteed ways to fail. I think one way that our framework here is as a solo agent, if I wanted to guarantee that I'm not going to be victorious, what would I go about doing? And as a team owner, if I wanted to guarantee that things weren't going to work out the way I dreamed of them working out, what would I go and do? It sounds like a weird thing, not to go off on a total tangent, but you can do the same thing in your health and in your wealth and in your relationships. Like if you want to guarantee a bad marriage, here's the things you can go and do. And then, the difficult thing is when you reflect on it and like, oh my gosh, I am starting to go into that territory. Or if I want to be unhealthy, instead of what would I do to be healthy, what would I do to be unhealthy? I know it sounds like a weird practice, but we approach this subject in much that way, using this mental model of inversion and just asking these questions. And that's how I think we not only just came up with the worst practices, but then you start working through, okay, now that I know this, what would be the better way to approach it?
And I would encourage everyone to go back to their business plans and just run them through this filter. And every time I'm consulting someone on a business plan, I'm going to run them through that filter. Okay, now that we've identified all the ways that you could fail, let's take a look at the business plan and see what something from this list is going to come up in your business plan if you're really being honest with yourself. And so I need you to use this as a filter to go through and say, what of these am I actively doing or is a part of my plan that I need to take out? That's our goal for everyone today. And by the way, as we go through this, drop your questions in the chat, drop your takeaways in the chat. We want to make sure that you're all on the same page with us, and we'll make sure we get to as many questions as we can. Ready to jump in?
Yeah, so we're going to start, Nikki, before you pull up that slide.
Oh.
I see my timing was poor. Before we go there, right, we're going to start solo agent. But one thing that I want to make sure we do this time, a lot of people here know you, and a few of them probably don't. So I want to ask you the question before you start going through the worst practices for being a solo agent. Why should they listen to you? What makes you credible in this space?
It's a great question, Brian. Other than the fact that I myself was a solo agent, I went through so many challenges as an individual agent who unsuccessfully, or rather I should say begrudgingly, built a team and hated every minute of it, and simply did it because of what you mentioned earlier, wherein I said, well, this is the only path to be successful. That's what everybody's telling me. And I got so frustrated with it that I eventually built a platform that's exclusively and specifically designed for solo agents. So historically in the real estate business, you had three options as a solo agent. You could either build it all out yourself, take on the overhead, take on the complexity, take on the HR, take on everything yourself and build it out. Or you could join a team and then you were building someone else's business, which is usually not why most of us got into this in the first place. And I also got in the game when teams aren't what they are now, right? They didn't have the resources and the structure, and the teams were very new when I came into this world. I think today it would look different for me. And There was always the third option, which is you stay where you are, which for someone who's growth oriented is a slow death, right? And so I looked up and said, well, I don't want any of those. I want all the economies of scale, all the support benefits, infrastructure of having a team around me, but I don't want to do it myself. I don't want to build it all out and take on the overhead. Don't want to join a team, and obviously don't want to stay where I am. Is that too much to ask? And the industry said, yep, can't do all of that. And so naturally, that's what we went out and built. So I founded a platform exclusively and specifically designed for individual agents, where we give them all the economies of scale, support benefits, infrastructure of having a team around them, except for they don't have to build it all out themselves and they don't have to join a team. So it's a do it for you model wherein we support their entire business. All that to say, I coach literally hundreds of individual agents that are doing hundreds of transactions a year as individual agents. So I see it all. I see the people who are the most successful in this space, and I see the people who fail phenomenally in this space. And then we have to help them through that. Brian, you do the same, because I know that there's probably people on here who don't know why they should listen to you. And by the way, they should.
Yeah, on the team side of things, right? So Nikki, today is, believe it or not, I know you're not going to believe this because of how young I look, but today is my 18th anniversary as a sales agent. So February 11th, 18 years ago, I officially
Happy
became a sales agent.
anniversary. Let's give Brian some love in the chat.
How
He
about
started
that?
this
So,
high.
so all that really means, it means two things. Number one, I'm getting pretty old, and number two, I've had a lot of opportunity to screw things up and learn from those mistakes. So I have 18 years of real estate team building and getting into the expansion space and doing all that. And I spend most of my time these days in two key areas. One is running a big real estate mastermind known as Metrics, which Nikki, you may or may not know this yet, but you're coming to speak at here soon. I don't know if that's shown up on your calendar, but we're working on that. So I run this mastermind, and I spend a lot of my time at places I think most people know as the chief real estate officer. And I say those two things only from the standpoint that I think I've got to be one of the individuals that probably talk to more real estate team owners across the nation than anybody, just given the nature of the mastermind and what I do for the company. And so I have an opportunity to constantly discuss things that are working, things that aren't working, how to overcome obstacles, what would be the strategy, how do you adapt to the current market. And so I think I've got a decent vantage point as to not just what works, but what also doesn't work. And in much the same way that you having the exposure to the solo agent game makes you the expert in that space. And so that's it. I think we just have a lot of at bats, and we could write books on the knowledge that we've accumulated over the years.
Yeah, and the mistakes that we've made too, that we'd love to prevent everyone else from making as well, right? And here's the thing, y'all. Brian's the person I call when I can't figure it out, and I can't find anybody else who can figure it out either. And him and I were talking just the other day, and we happened upon a conversation wherein we said, well, this person thinks like a real estate agent. And by the way, we don't mean that negatively, but what I want you to see in the thread of what we do, I know a lot of agents aspire to build other businesses too. And these are general business practices you should all pay attention to. And the more you learn outside of the space of what you've always known, the more you have the ability to assess what you're doing and make sure that it's actually right in correlation with where you want to go. So run this through the filter of if I wanted to build any business, these are probably some pretty solid best and worst practices as well.
Great.
So take that with you today too.
All right, all of that now leading into the slide that you already kind of gave us a glimpse of that we're dying to see. Nikki, talk us through the worst practices for being.
I already have button anxiety, and then I had more because I shut off too soon. Not good. The first is shiny object syndrome. Listen, y'all, I tell everybody on our team, I have a saying, which is shiny objects are sharp. Shiny objects are really sharp, and you got to be careful. And here's what I mean by that. this really is, this isn't a causal issue. This is an effect issue. The cause of this issue usually comes from the fact that an agent doesn't actually have a clear vision of what they want to build. Shiny objects, you can get pricked or cut by a sharp, shiny object, and it usually only happens if you don't have crystal clarity on what it is that you're trying to build. Because when you have that, well, then it's easier to put your blinders on and to say that doesn't apply in relation with what it is that I'm trying to build. But shiny objects will typically come up when you don't have crystal clarity on what you're building and how you're going to get there. It's easy to get off track when there are a million different directions, because someone often comes to me, I get this question all the time. Someone will say, well, what's the best form of lead generation? And I'll say, frankly, it's just really the couple that you're willing to do, because there's not one way to build a really successful real estate business. That's the good news. It's also the bad news. It's also the thing that can take you off track. It's always interesting to me. Brian and I are both about to head off to a conference, and it's interesting to me that when we go to something like this, you'll have agents that go to 12 different breakout sessions that are all about something different. And I can assure you that that agent is not going to implement anything that comes from any of those breakout sessions, because all it says to me is I'm not clear on what would actually benefit my business. And so shiny object syndrome is actually symptomatic of the real issue, which is that I'm not crystal clear on what it is that I'm building. Therefore, I'm not crystal clear on how I'm going to get there. Therefore, I'm not crystal clear on what fits inside of that business plan. Therefore, I don't know what to do today, right? When someone is easily distracted, it just says to me, you don't have a crystal clear plan on what it is that you're trying to do.
And
Ryan,
Nikki,
do you see, like, does that make sense?
it does. And what I was going to say to you, this shiny object syndrome that is all across our industry. How do we know that our industry is so impacted by it? Go to any real estate conference in America and walk into the expo hall. We have the grandest, most amazing expo halls in any conference space. And why is that? It's because we have shiny object syndrome. We walk in and we see what? We see solutions, supposed solutions to all of our various points of supposed pain. If we could just put our blinders on and make our way through that expo hall, we would arguably have better, all of us would have better businesses. But the reality is we're not doing that. How do we know? Because these expo halls are only getting bigger. Like the quantity of vendors alone just should tell us something.
I love in the chat, people like me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. It's all of us, by the way. But what Brian's saying is exactly right. We'll look up and say, oh, we'll lie to ourselves and say this shiny object is solving this problem. And I say, well, you can't hope to know the problem that needs to be solved unless you know what it is that you're trying to solve for, right? Like I can look at any business and say it's got a lot of problems, but whether the problems matter or not is a different conversation in relation with what it is that we're trying to build, right? So you have to start there. This is symptomatic. I want you to think every time you're about to touch one of those sharp objects that this is symptomatic of I am not clear on what I'm trying to build and how I'm trying to get there. So then you're going to come back to that. And if it fits in line with that plan, awesome. And if it doesn't, well, it's just a sharp, shiny object. That's all it is. The next is no accountability. And by the way, like I bet a couple of individual agents probably rolled their eyes here. And I bet a couple team owners rolled their eyes because they're like, I tried to impose accountability on people and it doesn't work. Or individual agents saying, well, no one can hold me accountable. And to which I would reply, I think a lot of people like this has been overused a bit in our industry, Brian. Like this word has been overused in the sense that we think of accountability. And by the way, most of us have a really bad relationship with accountability. Like we think it's someone sort of bringing down the hammer and saying you have to make this number of calls, you have to do this thing. And I would challenge all of you to start a different relationship with accountability. And what I mean is that individual agents, because they don't have anyone to report to, tend not to have accountability around the most important things. And here's what I mean. It's not just accountability around your behavior, which you need, by the way. It's also accountability around ROI. It's accountability around strategy. It's accountability around conversions. It's accountability around, is this thing working, right? Because we can easily lie to ourselves and say, oh, this thing is really important. Let me give you all a great example that I use with individual agents basically every day. I will have an individual agent come to me who's doing 30. I just had this conversation yesterday. They're doing 45 deals a year by themselves, no leverage at all. Which, by the way, sounds like the worst life I could imagine. Like, that's a really hard business life. I know that person is working a lot. And so they came to me and I said, well, this is what we do. This is how we support you. And the person said, yep, all that sounds good. But Nikki, I can't let it go because I've always done my own paperwork. And the way I do my paperwork is just, it's really important. And I said, awesome. I need you to pull up all your reviews for me. And she sort of looked at me sideways and I said, yeah, just go ahead. I got time. Pull up your reviews. And so she did. She pulled up the hundreds of reviews that she has and all the people that love to work with her. And I said, perfect. Show me all the ones that say, I work with you because you're so good at your paperwork. Oh, wait. That's accountability, right? We have to actually have someone who can hold up a mirror and assess whether that thing is working or not. We can lie to ourselves and say that these postcards are the best thing I do, but then I'm going to ask you, well, what results have you gotten from them? And if you can't point to that, then it says to me that you just don't have any accountability around that thing. And it's easy as an individual to lie to ourselves because we like it or because it's comfortable and we've always done it that way, that it actually matters. And it's a hard pill to swallow when someone says, nope, that's not actually helping you the way that you think it is, right?
Yeah, accountability is just, you're right. It's an overused term, but it really is it is that simple. It doesn't mean it's easy to execute on or implement in your world, but it really is that simple. Again, I alluded to, this conversation today extends beyond business.
Yeah.
I'll go back to health. If you want to be a healthier version of you, if you want to show up at the gym at a certain time, what's the simplest way to guarantee that you're in fact going to show up at the gym on time? Introduce a partner to work out with you.
You got it.
If you want to guarantee that you're going to eat right, introduce your family to the same meal plan, right? If you want to guarantee that, you're going to have a great relationship or at least take steps towards a great relationship, introduce, conversations with peers and others. The idea is this exposure creates a degree of accountability. And in doing so, you up your game as a result. Said differently, if you eliminate all of that, the likelihood for failure is exponential when you're just hiding.
100%. And the next I'll get to is unrealistic plans. There is nothing, Brian, more frustrating to me than an unrealistic plan. And here's how this shows up. I just did a training for a friend of mine. They've got a team of a couple hundred agents, and I just did a training for all of them. And we had an interesting phenomenon because there was a person on the call, and she said, Nikki, this has been a really valuable training. I realized that I haven't been doing all the things that I did last year to make me successful. And my goal this year is to double my business. So I need to do all those same things again. And everybody in the chat was like, yeah, get it, girl. You got this. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Listen, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you do all the same things that you did last year, you will not double your business this year. You will get the exact same results that you did last year. I know that Brian and I have this conversation with people all the time. Someone comes to us and says, this is the year I'm going to double my business. And I'll say, that's amazing. I can't wait to see the plan. And they're like, oh, it's exactly the same plan that I had last year, but I'm going to double it this year. I'm like, nope, that's not how that works. If you want to get different results, you have to show up differently. You probably need to change your systems. You're going to need to have more business intake. You might need to grow a team if you want to get there. You're all laughing in the chat because it's common sense, but it's not that common. What's more common is I see people replicate the exact same plan or exact same behavior that got them to where they were. And then they just pretend like it's going to get them to where they want to go. Or they make a plan to get to where they want to go, but they don't actually implement it. They behave exactly the same way they've always behaved. To the point that I've come up with this idea at the end of the year that I don't actually build goals for myself. I build what I call as a different list. And it's my reminder to myself that if I want to show up and get different results, I have to behave differently. I need to show up in my life differently if I want the outcome to be different. So I just build a different list. How do I need to show up differently this year in order to get different results?
Yeah, that different list is a really smart idea there. I hope everyone's taking that as an action item. Nikki, as you're talking around unrealistic plans, and I know how important it is. Like, people build big businesses in your world, but you want them to have big lives. And so when we think around unrealistic plans, sometimes I know you see, and I see it too, we develop this amazing business plan that, if executed, might very well double the business. However, we don't take into account what's going on outside of the office and make
Yes.
adjustments accordingly. Right.
Great.
So we may double our efforts or double our time in office, but still think we have the exact same time on everything else. And I think we've got to be realistic in assessing, the give and take.
Totally. I love that point, Brian. That's super important. And this is where, when we're building out business plans, you're absolutely right. Like, we have to take into account the rest of our lives. We have to take into account, if I'm going to double my efforts, that means that I'm taking some time away from something else, whether it's home or health or whatever it is. Again, we can lie to ourselves. As I tell my team often, we can lie to ourselves, and we can avoid reality, but we just don't get to avoid the consequences of avoiding reality, right? At some point, we have to deal with that. The next is stagnation, and this is just a common occurrence when it's all totally up to you. Brian alluded to it earlier. We just never push ourselves the way somebody else will. We just don't. We're terrible bosses, and it's always funny to me when somebody says to me, "I got into this business to work for myself." I'm like, man, Brian, I don't know about you, but I've never worked for myself. When I was in real estate, I worked for my clients. Now, when I run this business, I work for my agents. Like, I've never worked for myself. I don't know what that's like. And I hope I never do work for myself, because I'm just a bad boss to me. I'll be like, you know what? You went hard. Take the break. Like, you don't have to work out today. It's fine. Right. But we are always easier on ourselves than an accountability partner or a coach or just someone else that we have to report to or show up to is going to be on us. And if you don't have that around you as an individual agent, you will stagnate. You just will. It's not if, it's when. And so you have to have something that's going to push through. And here's the challenge. If you are someone who says to yourself, you're not growth oriented, I get a lot of people who come to us and they're like, I don't know if I'm a fit because, like, I don't want to build a huge business. I'll say that might be true, but every human being wants to progress. It's literally in your DNA. You are literally built for it. And here's how I know. Every time you stagnate, look back at your own life. Like, do this exercise for yourself right now. Look back at your life and just think about every time you've felt, I call it the itch. Like, I know when I'm starting to stagnate in a category of my life because I just start to get the itch. And that's usually when shiny object syndrome comes up, right? It's me saying, like, I don't want to stay here anymore. And when that happens, it's because you stagnated. And what we often do when we don't have a plan to get through that ceiling of achievement is we'll start bringing on other businesses. We'll start doing side hustles. We start volunteering at things. We start doing something else that's not in alignment with where we want to go, because we either don't know how to get through that ceiling or we don't want to do what it takes to get through it. Okay. So stagnation comes up when we start to get that feeling. And it's very common for individual agents because you don't have the resources immediately around you or the people around you to pull you through. And it's usually, if you stay there long enough, the risk is that if you stay here long enough, you'll usually end up quitting. That's my experience.
It's really, really well said. I'm just thinking through what you were saying there. This feeling of stagnation might be occurring when you're hitting the ceiling and you're trying to run from it in some ways. Yep. I mean, it's just a fascinating way to look at that. I also think quite a bit, and you kind of touched on this, environment matters, right? Like, your environment matters so much more than we all probably give it credit, right? Like, we've all heard the old adage, you are the average of the 5 people you're spending the most time with. Yeah. Nikki, I know you and I have both found that not only are we the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with, our income is likely the average, our habits are the average, that our goals, our vision is the average of the 5. Like, your environment really, really matters. And I think around stagnation, sometimes if someone's stagnant, it may be hey, let's check the environment. Let's check who I'm surrounded by and make some changes around that. Just a really good call out.
It's also where you see people who are really driven continuously level up their environment. They're continuously putting themselves in the way of other really successful people, to the point that, I don't know, I know this is the same for you, Brian. We've gone to some of these conferences before where we're like, we are the dumbest people here. Like, we are absolutely not, I shouldn't speak on your behalf. I said, like, I am the dumbest, least successful person here.
I think we just went somewhere a handful of months ago and we were sitting next to to one another. And I think we made that comment, like we might be the two dumbest individuals in this room.
Yeah, we were like, we don't belong here, but we're happy to be here. We're going to continue to put ourselves in the way of this.
Now, in all fairness, Elon was there, and like there were some big names. But no, we were the dummies in the room for sure.
We were totally.
And we were great. And
I'm glad I didn't impose that on you. That it was the royal we.
We were grateful that we
grateful.
got to play that role for sure.
And the last is this, it's singular experience. And you touched on it, Brian, which with this idea is that the people around you help you to level up. And I'll give another perspective on this, which is, I remember I was on a big panel at a real estate event once. And I said, at the time I was still selling real estate. And I said, I actually hate that I do business in California. And the whole audience, it was like a little tone deaf because the whole audience was like, oh, woe is me. Your average price point's 1.5 million. I said, hear me out. I'm actually going to have a harder time than everybody else building something successful because I don't get repetition. In other words, if you do 20 deals in my market, you're a top agent, right? Whereas somebody else in another price point in another market has to do 70 deals to even match my volume. That person is a way better agent than I am. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. They're more experienced. They've gone through more repetition. And so as an agent, you have singular experience, right? I want you to think the difference between somebody who has to do 70 deals a year to make the same amount as somebody who's doing 20. And I said, my systems, they don't break because I don't ever have the unit volume to break them. It actually doesn't tell me that I'm really good at what I think I'm good at because I can't stress test it as fast as somebody over here can stress test it. So it actually is a negative to my business building. And it's the same when you're a solo agent all by yourself. You don't have anyone to run it by. You don't have anyone who can give you their perspective or experience. You don't get the repetition to know what works and doesn't work. And this goes right back to where I started, which is sometimes it's easy to get distracted by shiny objects when you have a singular experience, because I could look at that because I have so much information. Brian could look at that because he's consulted so many people and has so much information and say, oh yeah, tried that, doesn't work. Or tried that, that's a good idea. Or tried that, but you got to do it this way, or it only works this way. But as a singular agent, if you don't have that outside support, you don't have that, right? And that can be a real challenge to the business.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, Brian. So we got through some of the worst practices for a solo agent: shiny object syndrome, no accountability, unrealistic plans, stagnation, and singular experience. Shall we jump into team?
Let's do it. And you can just keep the slide up because I know you're navigating and going back and forth so efficiently. If you want to just throw that worst practices for a team owner up, and let's work through some of these. Now it's interesting when I was reviewing this list that we wrote not all that long ago. It's amazing how frequently this may change. Like there are consistent worst practices, but market impacts things. Where we're at in the economy impacts things. Where you're at with respect to where you're located impacts things. But these 6 worst practices are the 6 most prevalent things I see showing up with real estate teams right now. So again, in having as many conversations as I'm fortunate to have with some of the best team owners around the nation and some team owners that are not having the success they desire, these 6 are what I'm seeing show up quite often. Let's talk about this very first one. When we're building a team, we have to recruit to that team. We have to attract agents to our team. Team building, teams have agents. Yes, they have operations and admin that are top level, but for sake of this conversation right now, or this point right now, we're talking about recruiting agents. And one massive mistake or bad practice, poor practice that I see many team owners make is that we jump into this, I got to recruit mentality, but we recruit without an understanding of who we're looking for and what we expect out of those individuals. Every team is going to be a little bit different with respect to what it expects. What's my lead generation model? Again, where am I working? What's my price point? Things are different depending on your team. But what is all common, and what I could say is same across the board, is the most successful teams have very clear expectations of the people that they're bringing onto their team. They're also very clear around the value that they provide as a team. They can define their value proposition. So if recruiting without a clear performance standard is 1A, 1B would be recruiting without a clear understanding of your value prop. Unfortunately, many real estate teams around the nation, Nikki, are, well, they're kind of built in this sort of way. I'm an agent. I'm doing a lot of business. One day I look up and I say, oh my gosh, I'm going to break. I can't possibly do all this business and do this paperwork. So, okay, you in my office, come over here. Will you help me with my paperwork? And it starts to work. You start to get some time back. And then you're like, I got a bunch of leads coming in. I'm neglected. You over there, you're not doing a lot of business. Come join my team. And that happens. And one day you look up and you've got a lead admin, and that lead admin has a VA. And then you've got 4 agents over here, 2 of which show up on occasion, one that's maybe doing a good job, one that's always looking for the next big thing. And you are not happy. And I think a lot of that happens, Nikki, because we didn't start with the end in mind. We didn't say, hey, when I build this business, what do I expect out of my agents? What do I expect out of my people? Not only what do I expect, but what am I willing to hold accountable to in some regard? Like, don't get me wrong. I want I'm not here to determine what it is you want. You get to determine that. My job as a team owner is to support you along that way and get you from point A to point B in an expedited manner, and ideally with a little bit more joy. But I've got to have a standard. Probably one of my biggest ahas in the industry. Many, many years ago, I was in a conference. I was sitting in the front row, and the individual that was presenting, I knew pretty well. And she said to me, she said, Brian, what is the minimum production standard on your team? And I said, oh, everybody on my team's got to do 2 transactions a month. She goes, 2? I'm like, yeah. She's like, wow, that's amazing. Everyone on your team does 2? I said, well, no, I mean, not really. She's like, well, what do you mean? I thought 2 was the standard. She goes, and I go, well, no, I mean, we got new people who are building, and, I've got other people that they're getting 1 here and there, but they're building the 2. And she was quick to remind me in that moment, Brian, your standard is not 2. Your goal is 2. Your standard is actually 0, because if these individuals are part of your world and putting up consistent zeros, that is in fact the standard. My takeaway wasn't so much like, oh my gosh, I have a terrible team. My takeaway was that what I was defining as the standards and what I was recruiting to as the standards were not really standards. Those were just simply goals. And I chose, I took a step back and had to rewrite the type of team I wanted to build, the influence I wanted to have. So again, worst practice number 1, recruiting without a clear performance standard, but also recruiting without a clear understanding of our value prop.
100%. I also feel like, Brian, it's also, you're setting yourself up for failure as a leader when you said it so well. So many teams grow by saying, well, this person's not doing that many deals, so I'm going to bring them on so they can deal with my deals. And then they come into your organization and they exhibit the behavior of somebody who doesn't do that many deals. And then you get frustrated because they're not exhibiting the behavior you want them to exhibit. I'm like, you knew who they were before you brought them in. And now you're upset that they're being who they are after you made the decision to bring them into your organization. No. That's not how that works.
Yeah. Well, we think we could change them. And we might learn.
That always works so well.
Yeah. The second worst practice that we have, and again, this is a moment in time. This is something I'm seeing show up an awful lot. We are so hyper focused on lead generation, creation of new opportunities or supposed opportunities. And we have a tendency to neglect the actual conversion of the opportunities that are already sitting in our respective databases. I can almost guarantee that for those attending here right now, if you're running a team, there is a portion, if not a significant portion, of your database that is presently going untouched or not being worked appropriately, and therefore deals are being done. How do I know that? Deals are being done by others and not you. How do I know that? Because every one of you, if you are calling into your database in any capacity right now, solo agents as well, you will make a call in the next day or week or month, and it's going to go something like this. Hey, Nikki, what's going on? This is Brian. You and I were talking about a year ago. I'm the local realtor, and you're going to say, oh, Brian, let me stop you. I just bought a house last month. Every time you hear that sort of statement, it shouldn't be something you get frustrated or upset by. It should be an awareness exercise. You should say, there's gold in my database and I failed to mine it. And more oftentimes than not, while I see people failing to mine it, is because they're focused on generating new business as opposed to converting what's already in existence. My buddy Jason Abrams says it best, Nikki. I remember he used to say, in our industry, so many people are standing inside a diamond mine, but instead they're faced this way, looking out the exit, out into the desert and saying, gosh, I wish I was out there. And the reality is, if they just turn around and mine the diamonds in front of them, they would have a lot more success. So again, one of the worst practices that I'm seeing more often than right now than any of these others is just this neglect around conversion, having real dialogue and providing value. That's another reason why I see it happen. Sometimes we don't feel like we're providing value, and it's easier to go hunt for new than it is to keep up in our game, I should say, with respect to providing more value. And as a result, we neglect that lead conversion. I think you see it in the solo world quite a bit though, too, right, Nikki?
100%. I mean, y'all, you want to really have yourself a good cry. One of the exercises that we do with people when they convince us and themselves that there is just no business left in the database. I don't have as much time to do it now, but I used to say, great. So I'm going to call through your database and we're going to do a 90-10 split on any business that I find. I get 90%, you get 10%, and you're going to facilitate the whole deal. Sound fair? And they'll be like, yep. Guess how many, I never actually went through with it. I gave them the business, but guess how many times I generated business? Or a second exercise we would do is say, let's run you through this database. We'll call it together and let's just start accumulating how much money you missed out on by not talking to them consistently. And I've seen people walk away in tears after a couple hours after they got up to about $500,000. So you're right, Brian. There's so much to be garnered out of that we just forget about because we're always looking at what's coming through the top of the funnel.
The next worst practice you can see is poor commission structures and mismanaged expenses. I'm going to make this one short and sweet, Nikki. We, as in building real estate teams, oftentimes don't think like business owners. We don't think about the math. We look up one day and the math is controlling us, and we did not control that math. We didn't take a profit first approach. We didn't build out pro formas. We didn't say, hey, how is this commission structure going to affect my profitability? How are these expenses going to affect my profitability? What's the ROI? Like, look at any great business and they study their P&L. They study their financials. Look at a weak business and you see neglect. Unfortunately, in real estate, we have a tendency to not maintain active financials in a P&L and instead decide whether or not we're having a good month by whether our bank account balance goes up or down. That's what an amateur does. A professional manages their math. And so when I look at bad practices around team owners, it's just not a thorough analysis or firm understanding as to the math that's driving the business, specifically in the P&L. Which kind of leads to or segues to this over-reliance on a single source of business. Again, this is showing up quite often. We have an awful lot of real estate teams across the nation that have a disproportionate amount of their business coming from a single source, which is really, really risky. I'll spare you the details, but I'll give you the brief version of the story. Many years ago, I told you I've been in this 18 years, Nikki. So, early in the day, there was a lot of REO, a lot of real estate owned foreclosures. And I had more than one friend in the industry who was crushing it on a Monday and then came in on Tuesday and Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac had decided to shut off their REO account. That was a wake-up call for all of us that were in the business at that time, that I could have the business turned off at any moment. My takeaway was not that you shouldn't go down the foreclosure REO path at that time, but I have to have a more diverse lead generation or source of business mix. I'm all for putting my eggs in one basket in a variety of places within our business. I believe we have to commit. But when it comes to sources of business, I think we have to diversify because that's how most businesses are going to flourish over time. You may get a jump start or it may be a launch pad to go all in on a lead source, but then you develop a whole business versus just one single source.
Yep.
Now, the last two, I'm gonna kind of group them together because what I've seen happen for the worst teams around. And that sounds harsh, but I think we may have chatted about this a little bit last time, Nikki. The reality is, in our game, for some reason, when you produce at really high levels as an individual sales agent, people think that, well, the next natural step is to go build a team. And the skill set required to run and lead a team is actually quite different than the skill set it takes to be a highly successful real estate agent. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't become that leader. But to go back to some of the early conversation, Nikki, we've got to be purposeful in our development as a leader. What are we reading? What are we listening to? Who are we around? What are we attending? It is an entirely different skill set. It's why in the corporate world, you so often see some phenomenal salesperson who becomes what? What's the promotion? They get promoted to sales manager. And then they flounder and they're like, what happened to Jimmy? He was the best salesperson. And he turned out to be a bad manager. Yeah, it's because Jimmy's skill set, his sales skill set, did not translate to making Jimmy some phenomenal leader. Not that he couldn't become that, but he didn't raise his leadership lid, which kind of brings us to the very last one here. Teams that grow in the way that I was describing earlier, where it's, I'm doing a bunch of business, I'm going to grab some admin help. I'm doing a bunch of business, I'm going to grab an agent here, an agent there, an agent there. Suddenly you don't have an org chart. What you have is like this hub and spoke where you are sitting in the very middle and all these spokes are coming out of you. And everything is dependent on what it is you say and do each and every day. The leads coming in are dependent on maybe the signs that you're personally putting in the ground. The decisions, everything is bottlenecked by you because you haven't developed talent or recruited talent around you. So for those teams, maybe said differently, those teams that are flourishing, I see a very strong team leader, a visionary, someone that's influencing direction, but the whole world doesn't rise and fall with that potential individual. In practices, in medical practice or law practice, yeah, it is dependent in a lot of cases. In small practices, is dependent on that one person. I'm not knocking that, but that's not a business in my world, in my mind. That's one that the revenue and the success or the lack of success is dependent on that one person. Real businesses have multiple layers, lots of talent, and other people influencing the actual outcome. So, Nikki, I think we better move into best practices now because I know how limited on time we are. And you and I have a tendency to go super hard on a couple slides. I don't want to neglect too much.
I was just about to say we're awesome at a lot of things, and the two of us managing our timing on webinars isn't one of them.
We don't have a great track record.
But here's the deal, Brian. Like here's what's so important about this, though. I don't know about you, but I would actually rather over-index on this. If I'm building a business, I actually want to find out what are all the ways that I could mess this up before I get into best practices. Because if I can stay away from that, then I'm in pretty good shape, right? Like I can figure it out from there. And I'm betting everybody on this webinar is a fairly experienced agent, if not a very experienced agent. Right. And so we have to look up and realize, y'all, like this, we're giving you the path to success by saying, hey, watch out for these things. These are landmines that are going to blow you up. But let's go through these really quick, right? The anxiety, Brian. All right. Best practices for a solo agent. Know your numbers. And I'm not just talking about your money numbers. You need to know those too. I'm talking about your conversion numbers. I'm talking about your ROI numbers. I'm talking about your lead generation numbers. And the only way to know this is to track it. I got the best piece of advice in my entire career I could have ever gotten was a mentor of mine once said to me, Nikki, if it's not built for sale, it's built to fail. If it's not built for sale, it's built to fail. And some of you might be looking up and saying, like, I'm never going to sell my real estate business, or I don't aspire for that. Awesome. I didn't aspire to sell my business either, but I built it for sale. And when you sell a company, they're going to request all your books. They're going to request your numbers. They're going to want to know your ROI on things. They're going to want to know conversion rate on things. They're going to know how this thing works. And so when you build it with that in mind, you will, by nature, build out the KPIs that are important for you to know. If you think about if somebody was going to buy my business, what would they want to know? Then build it that way. You'll have everything that you need to know about what's working and not working, right? So just build it for sale and it won't fail, but you have to know your numbers. Brian said it earlier, choose your lead generation levers. You need to know how you're bringing in business. And yes, you can't only have one. I tell people often, we get agents all the time who are like, well, can't you guys just call my database? Can't you guys just build these relationships? I'm like, totally, if you want your entire business to be beholden to me. This happened with some companies that we won't name on this call that got bad raps in the real estate industry, to which I look up and say, we did that. Like, we built it because we weren't following up and we weren't having conversations and we didn't follow through. Like, we did that. They didn't do anything wrong. They maximized on a business opportunity, which is what we all should do. And yet it's really because we didn't do our part that happened. So we need to understand that we need to have multiple lead generation levers, and you need to be able to control them, not let them control you. Find your tribe. Like, if you're going to be solo, you got to find the people who are going to motivate you, help you learn, help mastermind, help you be successful. You can't do this by yourself, right? Creative leverage. I think we talked about that last webinar. A lot of solo agents think, well, it's just me, therefore I have to do everything. No, it's not. You're delivering business to a lot of other people. You're delivering business to your lender, to your title person, to your attorney, to your home inspector, to your termite inspector. Like, all of those people that on your business, their business is built, they are leverage. Use them. Get a coach immediately. Get a coach. And my advice to you is to find a coach who has actually done the thing that you want to do. Quick story on this. I had an agent who came to me and said, I've been stuck at 30 million as a solo agent forever, and I literally cannot figure out how to break through. I've been coaching, I've done all the things everybody tells me to do. And my coach, I've been with them for 5 years. And I said, well, how much has your coach sold? And they said, that's a great question. I don't actually know. They came back to me the next week and I said, so what'd you find out? And they said, 30 million. I was like, great. You had a coach that knew how to get you to 30 million. They don't know how to get above that. So you need to go and get coached by someone who actually knows how to build what it is that you're trying to build. And then last but not least, you got to have a plan. Like, what are you going to do? Again, the shiny object syndrome only comes up when you don't have a plan how to get to where you want to go. Brian, what are the best practices for team owners?
Yeah, I think, when you look at this list, just like your list there, Nikki, I can't emphasize enough. These are great business practices. Forget about real estate for a moment. These are just great business practices. And so when I think about teams, the best teams out there, and these 6 come from a survey I ran about 2 years ago and have continued to build on around what are the best of the best doing? Like, what are the common practices of all of them? And I'll tell you, there's 6 primary that I've seen show up every month. I do this. I have this sort of assessment or analysis. Number 1, the best teams are clear on their direction. It doesn't have to be that perfect mission and vision, but there's clarity in terms of where they want to go, not just in terms of units or volume or GCI or net profit, but impact to the community or impact to our agents or to our people, whatever it may be. So I think the best teams are clear and they're motivated by that mission and that clarity. I think the next thing, we kind of already touched on this. The best teams are very clear on the value that they provide. Like, it's not, if I ask anybody on this call that's running a team, hey, what is it that makes your team special? What is the value that you provide? What is it that you do that's going to get an agent from point A to point B in an expedited manner? And if you stall or you're hesitant to answer that or you're unclear, I would fix that. That would be an action item for me, because the best of the best can do this like that. We do this, and this, and here's the results from that. They're very clear on their value prop. I think number 3 here in best practices, they act and they hire strategically. What does that really mean? It means they don't just operate on a whim. They don't just come out of left field with a decision on a Tuesday, then change that decision on a Wednesday, and then rethink it on a Thursday and scrap the whole plan on Friday. Instead, they're strategic in their analysis. They research the data. They take time. They use time, as part of their decision-making process. And then they act strategically. The best teams, Nikki, I think, they provide a degree of training and support that's superior to the teams that are just mediocre. They are a real estate team, but they're also very much a training organization. So not only are they training, but they're also providing all sorts of support. And that support may not just be in how to convert the next lead. That support can show up in a variety of different ways. Maybe it's my people don't want to just sell a lot of real estate. They want to learn how to invest. Or my people are making money. I need to help them, understand how to mitigate taxes. Right? So there's a support system there. I think the last two here, maintain a scoreboard. The best of the best can tell you exactly where they stand at any given moment. If you think about it, if you remove a scoreboard from an NBA game, how would watching that game be to you? Like, how would that feeling be? You'd be lost. You'd be confused. You'd have no energy. You'd have no cheering. You'd have no booing. Guess what? A lot of our real estate teams out there, Nikki, operate in that exact same way. We don't know what the score is. We don't know how much time is even left in the game, let alone what quarter we're in, how many fouls we have. Like we don't know how many timeouts are left. The best of the best maintain a scoreboard. And last thing, we communicate and we collaborate. The best of the best communicate and they collaborate within the team, right? And externally. The best partnerships out there, and I'll end with this, the best partnerships, and I think between team owner and agent, the best partnerships, they have two things. They have clear expectations for one another, and they have a communication schedule or plan in terms of frequency and cadence. All right, right to the top of the hour.
Right to the top of the hour. I will be willing. I don't know what you have after this. I can stay for 5 minutes or so and take a couple of questions if y'all have any burning ones. But do this for us so that we know the value that you are all getting from this. Throw some of your takeaways in the chat and also scan this QR code and answer the questions. Brian and I have tentatively committed to do more of these if it would be valuable to all of you. And there are additional things that we can hope to provide. Listen, both of us are in this industry to help you. We both continue to show up for this industry to help the people around us because we both got a lot of help. And there's also a lot of help that we wish that we had that we didn't. And so we want to make sure that we give back to all of you, to an industry that's given a lot to us. And we'll continue to do that if it would be of value. So I'm going to scan this QR code, answer the questions, but let's get to some Q&A. Shall we?
Let's do it. I got a couple minutes. Then I got a lunch date.
Ditto. You're going to the airport. Don't lie to us.
Nah, I go to lunch with my daughter first before I go.
Oh,
so then I'm out.
Jonas, yeah, it's being recorded. We'll send it out to everybody.
You said we all work for someone, Nikki. I work for a 14-year-old and 12-year-old in their dance school. That's who I work for.
Oh man, listen, that's better than right now. I work for a 4-year-old tyrant who like I can't let her know that she's the boss of the house, but I could see how somebody would say that. Jenna, will you throw in the chat the link for the QR code? Any questions for us before we jump off? All right, think we're good. Contact info, find us on social media. Brian, I think we're friends long enough now I can spell your last name. I think that's
Let's
it.
see. You know what? No, I think it's just B. Gubernick.
Oh, but I got your last name right, didn't I?
You did. That was impressive.
Hells yeah. I'm really proud of myself for that. All right, disregard this one. There we go. Brian threw it in the chat. In terms of difference in platforms, the best way, listen, if you are an individual agent, then you can check us out. If you're a team, then I would check Place Out.
Well said. Yep. One's agent, one's team.
You've sent me Facebook messages. I literally don't look at them. But if you message me on Instagram, I will totally respond to you.
Kevin, I send her messages on Facebook all the time. She doesn't respond to anything. So I totally get it.
I really don't look at them. I don't even have the app on my phone. Once they put it into a new app, I was like, I'm out.
Although Kevin might say,
Not
talk about messaging.
Multiple places for the same thing. All right, y'all. That's it for us. Thanks for being here. Make sure that you fill out the questionnaire so we can keep bringing you all value. Brian, thank you, as always, for being the best co-host.
Thank you so much. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us. See y'all soon.
Bye, guys.